And I'm going to request Rishi, you can start the recording now. Great. So welcome everybody. Welcome to our inaugural webinar. This is the first time we're doing something like this. So it's a great experience for all of us, myself, your host, and the speakers. I'll introduce them very briefly in a moment. I just want to welcome everybody. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for joining in. I'm sure that many more people will also join as we go forward. So I'd like to begin by actually just doing a very quick intro to myself, to Cancer Awakens, to the work that we do, and why we are doing this seminar. So if you give me just a moment, I'm going to open the PowerPoint and I'm going to share some slides, and I will walk you through the introduction. Please bear with me for a second. So welcome to the breast cancer seminar. As you know, and as you can see, we have titled it An Opportunity to Nourish Yourself. And you may be asking yourself, well, what does self-nourishment have to do with breast cancer? We're going to try and answer that question through the conversation. So a bit about myself. My name is Vijay Bhat. I'm the founder of Cancer Awakens. And my cancer history is like this, that in the year 2001, I had colon cancer, following which I had successful surgery. I was given the choice of whether to take chemotherapy or not, and I chose not to take it based on the statistics that the doctors gave me. And instead, I tried a holistic and an integrated approach. And I'm glad to say that 18 years later, I'm still here and in good health. Now, through this journey, I've been understanding and realizing and sharing some really provocative insights about cancer and our approach to it. For example, I say things like this. I say that cancer will change your life, maybe for the better, which is not how most people think of cancer. Or I might say things like, your best chance with cancer is to stop fighting it. Again, not something that most people would think about. I even go as far as saying, and this is true for me, I like to say that actually cancer healed me. It's not that I overcame my cancer, but cancer made me a healthier and a better person than I was before. So the whole idea, therefore, of Cancer Awakens started with these three questions that I began to ask myself on my journey. The first question was, when the doctors are treating the disease, who heals the person? And here I'm trying to distinguish between the tumor or the cancer or the organ in which that cancer is compared to the entire person. So in my case, my cancer was in the colon, and the doctors were treating the cancer and treating the colon, but somebody needed to heal the person. And the question is, who does that? The second question that was very important for me was this one, which is that I benefited from top quality holistic health in my early days. My question is, why can't everyone get the same kind of help? And I find that this is a big gap, and really what Cancer Awakens tries to do is to fill this gap. The third question is really the most provocative question, which is that what if we reframe cancer as a growth experience and not as a death sentence? Now, this is really trying to take the current taboo and stigma and fear and concern about cancer head on to say, when you really look at people who have thrived from cancer, you find that they have taken a completely different view. Their mindset towards cancer is very different. And so really it is with these three questions that Cancer Awakens was set up. And this is what Cancer Awakens wants to do. Cancer Awakens, we want people to awaken, heal, grow, and thrive through the daunting cancer journey instead of suffering like victims or dying on schedule. And how we propose to do this is that our vision is to have 1 million thrivers. You read that right. Yes, 1 million thrivers via 10,000 Sherpas. And Sherpas are our cancer coaches. So my belief and Cancer Awakens belief is that if we are able to create 1 million thrivers and 10,000 Sherpas, then we will really change the global narrative around cancer. So that's what we are really trying to do. What are our offerings? Let me tell you very briefly. We offer something called the Thriver program, which is an online coaching program for individuals, caregivers, and families. We offer the Sherpa program, which is a training and certification program for people who want to become cancer coaches. And we also offer a holistic health questionnaire, which we call the HHQ, which is a free online diagnostic to uncover your stressors and your strengths. And anyone can take it. This is not just a questionnaire for people with cancer. Anyone who wants to really understand their stressors and strengths, we make this questionnaire freely available. At the end of this webinar, I will share the links for all of these programs with you. Now let's come to this webinar itself. Why are we here? Well, first of all, we are here because October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I'm sure all of you know there are programs and initiatives all over the world on breast cancer. But perhaps more importantly, it's because breast cancer actually accounts for 25% of all women's cancers, and it is growing. We also know that most people around the world get decent medical care. Whether it is through a specialized hospital or it's through a general hospital, most people get good medical care. But we also know that the non-medical and the emotional care is generally very poor everywhere. And the most interesting and the most intriguing thing for us, and this is why we have set up this webinar, is that most people are also unaware of the psychological factors that affect cancer, particularly breast cancer, and that these psychological factors can not only trigger the illness, but if handled properly, they can also trigger healing from the illness. So really the purpose of today's webinar is to shine a light on these factors, to answer your questions, and to give you some useful tips as to how you can take charge of your own healing journey. So some webinar guidelines before we actually dive in and start the process. The first is that in this webinar, we are going to focus on the non-medical and what I like to call the human aspects of breast cancer. So we are not addressing medical issues. We are not addressing treatment-related issues. So I request you, when it comes to questions, is to focus on questions that have to do with the non-medical, the human, the psychological, the emotional, the spiritual questions. Those are the kind of questions we invite you to ask. This is not the forum for medical or treatment-related issues. Excuse me. The second is for all the participants, and I'm delighted to see right now that the participant number has gone up to 48. At the bottom of your screen on Zoom, you will see a box called Q&A. If you click on that box, if you click on that sign, a box will open up and you will be able to actually type in a question that the speakers will be able to see. So I'm just going to give everyone a chance to just click on that button, Q&A, if you don't mind. Click it and just type the word hi, H-I, hi, just so we know that the functionality is working for you and that we can also see your comments coming in. Thank you, Sangeeta. Thank you, Ratakonda, Sarita, Madhurima. So good. I'm glad that the function is actually working. And so I invite you, as you hear the webinar, whenever any question comes up that you would like to ask, I request you to type it into the question box, and my colleague Anamika will be looking at the questions and then passing them on to the speakers so that we can answer them. Thank you. The next point I want to say is that, look, we are doing this by the internet. We got lots of people from all over the world. And so it's quite possible that call drops and tech glitches can occur. For example, I know that one of the speakers, Sujata, who's calling in from Hyderabad, she's having a power problem, so you'll have to bear with us. So my request to all the participants is, if the call drops, if the tech glitches happen, please be patient. We'll do our best to get back as soon as possible. The last point I want to make is about the webinar guidelines, which is that the content of this webinar, it's fine to share the content in your personal networks. We will share a link with you on YouTube after the webinar is over. But we ask that you do not use this content in any public forum or for any commercial purposes. I just want to make sure that that is very clear and very explicit, that personal sharing in your networks is fine, but commercial or public usage of this material is a no-no because of all the confidentiality and privacy issues that are involved. So with that, I'd like to move on and introduce the speakers. I've already introduced myself, so I won't do that again. But let me start by introducing Sujata. Sujata is a transpersonal psychotherapist. She's based in Hyderabad in India. She has 26 years of practice experience, and she has recently written a book called When the Beloved Calls. So I'm very happy to introduce and welcome Sujata to this webinar. Sujata, welcome. The second person I want to introduce is my good friend now of many years, Vandana Gupta. Vandana is also herself a 25-year lymphoma thriver. She is also the founder of one of Mumbai's best-known cancer support organizations called VCare. She's an Ashoka Fellow, and she's a national and an international speaker. And last but by no means the least, let me welcome and introduce Anju Kurien. Anju is an 8-year breast cancer thriver herself. She's a senior HR leader in the advertising, marketing, and media space, and she's also a trained coach. So my warm welcome to Sujata, to Vandana, to Anju. And just want to say that as of now, I can see that we are plus 50 participants. So that's excellent. Let's move on. Now, one of the things that we are going to do in this webinar is that we are going to conduct some instant polls. So just to give you a flavor of how these polls work, I'm going to request Rishi, who is our tech wizard, to launch the first poll, and then I will explain what is going to happen. So Rishi, if you can please launch the first poll. I hope everyone can see what's come up on your screen. So since I introduced the participants, the speakers, now actually we want to know a little bit about you. So you will actually see that there are 2 questions on your screen, and we invite you to please complete these 2 questions. You just have to click, and then we'll give it about a minute, and then we will share with you the results. So right now I can see that about 21 people have voted. There are still another 25 to vote. just for you to know that all your votes are anonymous. We can simply see which questions have been voted for. We can't really see who has voted for which question. So please feel free to be frank in this polling and in this voting. Okay, so I can see about 40 people have voted. So I think, Rishi, you can share the results. And you can see that the participants, all of you can also see, the speakers can also see that right now there are about 23 people on the webinar who are just interested in the subject. That's about 60%. And when you look at the second question, which is which of the pre-work, that is the videos and the quiz that you have taken, we can see that some of you have taken both, some of you have taken one. So this was really for us to get a feel for what the audience is like, and also for you to get a feel for how the polling system will work. So Rishi, I'll request you now to stop sharing the results and we'll go back to the webinar content. Right, so let's get into the content of the webinar now, and I invite all the speakers to now unmute their microphones so that you can be heard by the participants and you can be heard by me. So my first question is to Vandana. Vandana, welcome. Vandana, you've had a lot of experience working with people with breast cancer in India. What, in your experience, have been the top 3 psychosocial challenges that women face? Vandana, over to you.
Hi. Breast cancer remains the most common tumor. It has a unique and complex psychological impact. It creates negative impact on self-image and body image. People who come to WeCare have many needs and issues, which are mainly medical and financial, but some of them have great psychological issues. Since we're talking only of the psychological issues, I would focus on them. So lumpectomy or mastectomy, that creates a lot of issues. Emphasis is needed to support women during their decision-making period. Psychological influences play an important role as they affect the ability and willingness to obtain and comply with available treatment. Dietary patterns may also be important. Psychological and social variables contribute to the quality of life, if not directly to survival time. The women sometimes are scared that their fears have caused breast cancer, but there is no data to prove that. However, fighting spirit and active participation are desirable, but a period of distress associated with problems of illness is not. People who have joined support groups have better coping skills. Women who have a need for greater participation and a sense of control in their care, that should be encouraged to employ these methods, provided they do not interfere with conventional therapy and have no no negative effect. For reintegration, reconstruction, or use of prostheses helps gain confidence. Special attention must be directed to the psychological well-being of the immediate relatives of the women with breast cancer, especially their daughters. I think these are some of the psychosocial challenges that I would like to talk about.
So Vandana, if I were to paraphrase you, what you're saying is that breast cancer is a pretty complex kind of a cancer because it has to do with a woman's identity and her sense of self-esteem, and that the psychosocial challenges are different based on what stage of the illness is. For example, when they are recently diagnosed, they may have certain challenges. When they are contemplating which treatments to take, they may have certain challenges. When they're in the middle of treatments, they may have certain challenges. And even in issues, things like whether it will affect their families and their daughters and so on, these are also some of the psychosocial challenges that you have highlighted. Thank you for that. Sujata, I'd like to come to you now. Sujata, can you tell us, as a practicing psychotherapist and somebody who's done a lot of research in this area, why is self-nourishment so important in breast cancer?
Thanks, Vijay, for your question. The best way to answer this would be to reference someone from my own field of practice. The renowned hypnotherapist, Milton Erickson. I'm sure some of the participants who are in the field of psychology and therapy might be able to connect with Erickson's work. He invented a very potent therapeutic approach called the paradoxical intervention. This idea, this approach is based on the principle that the symptoms of a dis-ease, if you can split the word dis-ease, are symbolic of an unmet or unconscious psychological need of the person. And so if you understand the symbolic significance of the problem, of the disease, of the presenting symptom of an illness, then the problem itself is prescribed as a solution. So now applying this principle to breast cancer, if you understand breast as a symbol of nurturance and nourishment, then the illness can be seen as a very, very powerful opportunity to figure out ways to nourish yourself. So that is how I would connect the two.
So if I've understood you correctly, you're basically saying that the breast is an organ which is associated, a physical organ which is associated with physical nurturance and nourishment. And if you approach it symbolically, then breast cancer is symbolic of the woman's need for nourishment or nurturance, which may not have been met. Is that is that the best way to understand it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So therefore, you're saying that when somebody has breast cancer, then one of the lines of inquiry to pursue is really to ask the extent to which this woman has been nourishing not only the people around her, but whether she has been nourishing herself.
Absolutely. Yes.
Great. Thank you for that. That's a very intriguing, fascinating approach. I want to now go to Anju. And Anju, since you have experienced breast cancer yourself 8 years ago, how does this symbolic approach that Sujata has outlined, and how do some of the psychosocial challenges that Vandana has outlined, how did they apply to you? What can you tell us from your real life lived experience? Anju?
So hi, thanks for the question. I actually chanced upon this whole symbolic approach. When I got my cancer, I was trying to understand what is it that led the cancer to happen, and in the process, I decided to experience many healing options that came my way. Of course, there was surgery, chemo, radiation happening parallelly, but I decided to dwell a lot more on what is it that I could do more in terms of healing myself. And that's when I saw a common thread between nourishment and mothering, and a realization that I was really seeking nourishment on emotional, mentally, spiritually, and dietary. So on all aspects, there were different things that I needed to nurture myself with. And once I started doing it, I realized the difference it was making to me. It wasn't a one-day thing, but it takes, I think over the 8 years, I've only ended up learning more and more about the whole process and actually making it better for myself. But that understanding that this is nurturing, and how I was mothering my relationships was actually a revelation for me. Cannot hear you.
Yeah, if I've understood you correctly, Anju, what you're saying is that you chanced upon this approach. It wasn't as if this approach was provided to you in any structured fashion.
Right.
And when you went into it deeply, you started making the connections between the self-nourishment part, the self-love part, and you realized that you had been neglecting yourself at the expense of caring and nourishing others.
That's right.
And when you went deeply into it, you realized that you needed nourishment at many levels, not just in one aspect of your life, but in many aspects of your life.
That's right. In fact, In fact, I used a book, Louisa Hay, Heal Your Life, extensively. But
Yeah.
I'm sure that your experience can actually share a lot more on that front.
Yeah. So
This would have been fantastic.
That's a
Hear
good
from you.
point. That's a good point, Anju. So I'd like to share some references with all the participants that we use in our work regularly. The first one, of course, is You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay. It's a very famous book. It's a multi-million copies have been sold around the world in multiple languages. And Louise Hay herself is a cancer survivor, cancer thriver, and she explains very clearly what is the relationship between the physical aspect of the illness and the psychological aspect of the illness. So that is one very strong case made by a very famous practitioner. Another one is by a lady called Caroline Meese, and her book is called Anatomy of the Spirit. I'll repeat that, Anatomy of the Spirit by Caroline Meese. Caroline Meese basically talks about illness as being an energetic imbalance. What she says is that the physical symptoms of any illness can be connected to an energetic imbalance. And she has done an enormously deep study of the chakra system from yoga. And she is able to make the connection between physical illnesses and certain imbalance in the energies that come from our respective chakras. So that's another very powerful book. The third source that I'd like to talk about for our audience, and you may want to consider reading it or looking at it on Google or Amazon or something like that, is a book called The Healing Power of Illness. I'll repeat that, The Healing Power of Illness. And this book actually is written by two psychotherapists who have done a great deal of work in trying to understand what is the psychological message that a physical illness is trying to communicate. So their approach is slightly different from Louise Hay's, or their approach is slightly different from Caroline Meese. What they are saying is that illness is a message from our body, from ourself to us. And we need to really understand and decode what that message is. So that's the third source. And the fourth source that I would like to talk about is a very famous book called Cancer as a Turning Point. And in a minute, I will show you the pictures of these books, but let me just speak about it now, which is basically what Lawrence Lashan, that's the name of the author, what he's saying is that people who do very well in healing themselves from cancer basically take a fork in the road. They look at their life and they completely change the direction in which their life is going. So they really use cancer as a turning point in their own life's journey. And he provides a lot of case studies and he provides a lot of very good steps by which you can actually do that. So while there are many other sources, I want to focus on these four sources for the purpose of this webinar. So I would like to now just go to a few questions that have come in from the audience. Thank you for writing in with your questions. This question I'd like to pose it to Anju. Anju, the question is, if you knew then what you know now, 8 years ago, if you knew then what you know now, what would you have done differently?
I have definitely been far more honest with myself and to myself, because I felt I was not being honest, and I was trying to control and live in a perfect world that I was imagining to be a perfect world. So I think that I would have treated very differently on an overall thought process.
So in other words, you're saying that, you were kind of deluding yourself, or you were not willing to look at yourself in as brutally honest a fashion as you needed to.
If anybody asks me how am I, I'd say perfect. I'm absolutely fine. There was no question of saying that, anything's troubling me. So that perfect world that I created for myself, I was actually hurting with that.
Thank you for that. That's a great insight for, I'm sure, for all our participants to hear. Let me just look at some of the other questions. I think this one's a good one for Sujata. The question from one of our participants is, you've talked about self-nourishment. Are there any other insights from a psychological standpoint that you can share about breast cancer? Sujata?
Sure. Yes. Sure, Vijay. So when we speak of emotional and mental triggers, we take a radically different approach to understanding and dealing with illness. So instead of seeing illness as a disruption or an obstacle or sometimes even a curse, we see illness as a symbolic message from our psyche that contains important information about our deeper self and also about what is critical to our own healing and wholeness as a person. So from this perspective, the symptoms or the illness need to be decoded to receive and act upon that important message about our own well-being. Seen from this perspective, seen in this way, breasts symbolize care, support, love, comfort, and all such qualities and attributes typically associated with the mother, the maternal instinct. So as Anju has just shared, breast cancer thus becomes a wake-up call to assess and redefine how a woman relates to all these aspects and how they are playing out in her own life. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, so if I'm hearing you right, you're saying that self-nourishment is a very important part of the psychological aspects of breast cancer, but it's not the only one. There are other dimensions as well in terms of how you manage your relationships, the extent to which you love and care for yourself, compared with the kind of love and care you're providing other people. And really, it's about opening up these different lines of inquiry for people so that they can find out exactly what is the area that they need to focus upon. Would that be a fair summary of what you said?
Yes, yes. And I'd like to add a quick point here. I think this issue is particularly relevant for women and perhaps women across the globe, irrespective of geographical or religious or any other affiliations. The difficulty or the confusion in having a sense of oneself and one's own boundary in delivering this role of mothering and nurturing, and hence perhaps the the incredible percentage of breast cancer in the cancers amongst women.
So that's an important point I think you're making, which is, and maybe it's worth reiterating the point, which is that we have also seen in our work with many breast cancer patients and clients that they have boundary issues that they have to deal with. Where does their boundary start and stop, and where does somebody else's boundary start and stop, and how do those boundaries interact, becomes a very important aspect for them to work upon. I think that's a great insight. Thank you for that. Then let's see, let's take another question. Okay, I think maybe I should take this one. The question is, all this is very fine, but what's the science behind all this? Is there some substance behind what we are saying, which is this whole psychological, these psychological factors? Well, the good news is that there is actually very good science behind it. And so let me just spend a minute explaining it. This science was first brought to light in the late 70s or in the early 80s by a neuroscientist called Dr. Candice Pert, who lived and worked in the US. And what she discovered was something very powerful. It's called the science of psychoneuroimmunology. I'll repeat that. It's called the science of psychoneuroimmunology. Now, what does that mean? Basically, what it means is that our psychology, which means how we think, our thoughts and feelings, have a direct impact on our neurology, which is how our brain functions and the kind of neurotransmitters that the brain sends out to the entire body. And because of those neurotransmitters, what happens is that our immune system is either strengthened or compromised. So let's suppose, as an example, let's say if I have major issues with anxiety and worry, that's my psychology. I feel anxious and worried all the time. What it's going to do is that it's going to trigger my brain to send out certain neurotransmitters which are associated with anxiety and worry. And those neurotransmitters will get sent all through my body. And when the immune system realizes that there are these strange new neurotransmitters floating around in the body, the immune system now starts to focus on these neurotransmitters and in a way takes its attention away from what it is supposed to do, which is really to look at the external or internal threats that the body is facing. So this science, the science of psychoneuroimmunology, is called the science of mind-body medicine. And this is extremely empowering for people because once you understand this science, you know that you can do a lot about your own immunity. And this is a very key part of healing. So in a nutshell, this is the science behind it. I'll repeat the words again for the participants. Psychoneuroimmunology. Please go ahead, please Google it, please check out for the research papers. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with what you find. So what I'd like to do after that is, Rishi, I just want to take a quick temperature check of all the participants, how they are feeling, whether they are finding this useful. So Rishi, could you please run the second poll for us? And I invite all the participants to please answer the second poll. Rishi. Okay, this is a single question. It should not take very long. We just like to get a sense from you. How you're feeling with the conversation so far. Okay, right now I can see that about 46 out of 59 people have voted. I'm really going to invite everyone else who hasn't yet voted. Please do vote because we would really like your feedback as to how you're feeling right now. Okay, I think we've got about 86% of the vote. So right now 52 out of 59 people have voted. And yeah, so you can see that about 77% of the participants felt that this is good stuff. Let's keep going. Thank you for your vote of confidence. We will keep going. About 11% of you said fascinating. I'm intrigued by this. And about 9% of you said so, I'll reserve my judgment. And only one person said, no, you lost me. Well, I'm sorry about that. Request you to stay on the call. Perhaps the second part of the conversation is something that you may find interesting. So, Rishi, we can stop sharing the results and let's go back to the conversation. So now I want to look at more questions that have come from the audience. And just give me a second while I read some of the questions and I decide who should be. I think, Anju, this is a good question for you. Let me read it out. The question says, how can I balance professional life with my cancer treatment? I want to focus on my health, eating right, taking rest, etc. But if I choose to go to work, I will end up stretching myself, not focusing on my health. So please guide me on the best approach in such cases. I think you're the perfect person to do this, Anju, because this is exactly what you have done. You went back to work. You're a very successful executive before and after. How did you balance this challenge? Anju, you're on mute.
So while the treatment is going on, obviously you need to concentrate a little more than normal. And I think everybody from the office and personal life is mostly very, very supportive of that. And if you treat it like, if you treat it like any other disease and not get psyched by it and scared of it, you can actually just do whatever you were doing previously, except for the days that you have to go for treatment. So in fact, I'd asked my doctor, I said, what is it that, what will happen when I start getting the chemo? Because once surgery is done, you're out of it. So what he said is that I have people coming to me, they take the chemo, they go to work straight from there, and they're looking after children, they're looking after everything else. So it is how you receive it. And there is enough and more support around for us to take help, and it'll come your way.
Correctly, if I hear you correctly, Anju, you're saying that it's a question of finding the balance, and that
That's
in
right.
the early days of your treatment and in the early days of your recovery, you may have to increase your focus on the health side. But
That's
over a period of time, you can bring back your focus onto your professional life and your career as well. And you're a great example of how you can actually do that.
Yeah.
I hope that helps to answer the question from the participant who asked it. The second question is a very interesting one, and I'd like to address this question to Sujata. The question is, are these sources or books also helpful in managing autoimmune ailments, specifically lupus, or are they specific to cancer? So the question is, can this approach be broadened to other illnesses as well, including autoimmune illnesses?
Yes, thank you, Vijay. So as I said earlier, this approach of looking at illness as a symbol, not a symbol, as a message from your psyche that's trying to convey something to you that you've not been listening to, applies not just to cancer. It applies to any kind of issue, whether it is a physical disease or a psychological condition. Um, so yes, whether it is lupus or depression or anxiety or cancer, whatever the illness, whatever the dis-ease, whatever the imbalance is, this approach serves very, very powerfully to help you explore what is it that you need to redefine or position in your life. What is it that you need to relate to in a new way or a different way in your life? Those doors open up when you pursue this line of inquiry. So yes.
Okay, let me just read some more questions. There are some great questions, and I'm inviting people to send in your questions, please. You can put them into the question box. Let's take another one. Yeah, this is a question that has come from one or two people, and this has got to do with your role as a caregiver. And so the question here is, one person has said, if someone in my family has been diagnosed with breast cancer, what can I do for them from a psychological point of view? And another person has asked the question, uh, how would symbolism help the caregiver to deal with their dear ones? And so I guess maybe this is another question that I should be asking you, Sujata, that if you were to place yourself in the caregiver's shoes rather than in the patient's shoes, how would you recommend that this approach be applied?
Right. So in this context, I would definitely like to refer to the book you and Nilima wrote, My Cancer is Me, where Nilima has devoted an entire chapter to explain what it really means to be a caregiver and how critical it is for the caregiver to take care of themselves, nourish themselves, so that they are in a position to then offer genuine, useful, and effective help to the patient, right? So, since the human mind is one and the same, whether you are sick or whether you're caring for the sick, the issues that you deal with can be very well addressed by this approach of symbolism, which is in what ways do you encourage dependency? In what ways do you like to hold on to control? In what ways do you like to feel important to be delivering care to someone who's critically ill or so dependent and vulnerable?
Mhm.
These are all lines of exploration that you can also inquire into as a caregiver. And one thing I would very strongly recommend that if caregiving is not something that you plan for or train for, it just lands in your lap. So it becomes like a parallel process where while supporting the patient, you also need to make sure that you're spending sufficient time and resources looking after yourself, tending to your own needs, setting up your own boundaries, and being effective in whatever care you're trying to give.
Thank you for that. I'd just like to add one more point, because there is a question which talks about the role of the family. And I'd like to bring Vandana in on this one. Vandana, from your experience, what have you seen is the vital role that the other family members can play? Not just the primary caregiver, but the other family members. And I'm sure you've seen people of all types, of all socioeconomic groups. What is the role that a family member can play when it comes to helping someone heal from cancer?
You said right that we see patients from all the socioeconomic groups, and the challenges and requirements are different for each of them.
Mhm.
So, like I would say about 80 to 90% people who are in the lower socioeconomic group are the ones who need information. The family needs to be informed. All the, like things like they should know that everything that we say is a myth, so that they don't feel scared about being with the patient, or they don't begin to take the decisions always for the patient, because they have to realize that it is only cancer which has affected the patient, and it's not like the patient has some psychological issues. So they have to let the patient take the decision, be with them, uh, have the right to decide on various issues, and that's number one. And the second thing is that patients and caregiver both have to realize that the patient has to realize that there are people who can look after them, and so it's only like they have to ask for their help, and the caregivers have to realize that they should help out only if if the patient asks for help. It is important that both of them know their roles, and they are not like overburdening each other with too much of concern, or too much of the patient should not feel neglected because the caregiver is going about doing their own work, or the caregiver should not over impose themselves. So those are the important issues which come up for everybody.
Mute myself. Then there is one more important question which I'd like to take, which is the last one, and then we will come to a close. The question is, what measures or approaches can I take to prevent breast cancer? I know they may not be 100% effective, but what changes can I bring in myself to prevent the same? So I'll take a stab at this question. And as I mentioned before, the foundation of the approach, whether it is for healing from cancer, if you've already have it, or whether it's about preventing cancer if you don't have it, is pretty much the same, which is, what can you do to keep your immunity in its optimum condition? So, and that is where the science of psychoneuroimmunology and the association with stress will come in, which is, we know that all of us now lead very stressful lives. And what we are probably not aware of is that this stress actually compromises our immunity. So one of the main things that we can do to keep ourselves in good health is to maintain our immunity in its optimum condition. And as we have heard Anju say, and as we have heard Sujata say, that your diet, how you relate with other people, your emotional landscape, your thoughts, and even your spiritual practice and your spiritual connection. These are all very powerful ways in which you can minimize your stress and optimize your immunity. So I would say to anybody who is looking at preventive or cautious approaches to breast cancer, that the real changes that you can make are at the lifestyle level, at the emotional level, at the mental level, at the relationship level, and also at the spiritual level. So essentially, you have to look after yourself at every level and keep your immunity in its pristine and in its optimum condition. Okay. Um, yeah, I think, well, there's one more question. I'm not sure we have enough time for it. So I think I'd like to go back to the speakers now and really ask each one of you, if you were to give one self-nourishment tip to the participants, what is the most important thing you would like all our participants to take away from this session? What would you like to say to them? Anju, why don't I start with you?
Uh, the one tip that I would like to give everybody and to myself is that don't hide from yourself. It can be the most harmful deceit that you do. And the damage that it does is something that affects you and your family. So be honest to yourself.
What a powerful idea, Anju. Just want to reiterate that for the participants. Tip number one from Anju Kurien is don't hide from yourself. Thank you. Sujata, what would your tip be?
Yes, I would say presence and balance, because I believe these two go hand in hand. I define presence as being attentive to yourself, others, your world, and the world at large as keenly as possible. Presence, in turn, allows you to notice, recognize, and hopefully address any imbalance sooner rather than later. At the core of all illness is imbalance. Illness, whether psychological or physical, almost always comes with a mandate to restructure your world, both outer and inner. Cancer, especially so. So it demands that you pay attention to yourself and your life in a whole new way. So I would go with presence and balance.
Thank you, Sujata. Very important message to add to Anju's message of not hiding from yourself is to find presence and balance and bring both of them into your life. Thank you. Vandana, what would be your one tip to our participants today?
I would say that courage and dignity are the most important things, because a woman has always had a lot of courage to be able to look after the house, to be able to look after the family, and to be able to do outside work. So if she has the courage to face all that, there is no stopping her from having the courage to face the disease and the dignity about it, because you should never feel ashamed of the fact that you've got cancer, and you should be as dignified as possible, and then let people respect you for that. I mean, nobody should be able to pick a finger on you and say that, you know, you've done something to have cancer. So that's not acceptable. So courage and dignity are the two things that are important according to me.
How wonderful, Vandana. Thank you for that. So can you see the message building up? And this is, I'm, really looking at the participants, that don't hide from yourself, find presence, find balance, and then bring a certain level of courage and dignity to everything that you do. Thank you for that. From my side, I guess the tip that I would like to really give people is to say that, cancer has a tendency to snatch power away from you. And when you're in that vulnerable and fragile and confused state, it's very easy to give your power away to somebody. But my tip is, the earlier you reclaim your power, the earlier you can take back control and take back charge of your own healing, the better your chances are going to be. So that would be my fourth and final tip to the participants. So with that, I hope this has been a enriching session for everybody. I know that I've enjoyed participating and hosting this conversation. Before I say thank you to everybody, I'd like to run the last poll, which is really a very quick feedback from all of you. So Rishi, can I request you to please run the last poll? And this time I would really want, again, two very simple questions. Invite all the participants to please answer the questions. Come on, we've got another 10 people or so still whose votes are still awaited. No? Okay. So, Rishi, let's... no, sorry, there are a few people still voting. All right. So let's see, what does it look like? So we've got 74% of you saying that good insights, I'd like to learn more. That's wonderful. I'll tell you some of the next steps shortly. About 20% of you got a lot out of it. Very excited to hear that. And some of you are still skeptical. And fortunately, none of you felt that you wasted your time. So that's good feedback for all of us. What would you like to do next? I think about evenly divided. About half of you would like to know more, and we'll find a way to contact you, or you can contact us. And the other half have said, no, nothing at the moment. You got what you wanted. So that's excellent. And Rishi, we can stop sharing the results. I hope everybody has seen that. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about what might be the next steps coming out of this. This won't take very long, so bear with me for a minute or two. So I'm just going to share my screen again so I can walk you through the next steps. I hope all of you can see the screen. So the first thing is, let's get this word out, particularly those of you who feel that you got some value out of it. Please share this webinar in your network. We will email you this webinar has been recorded. It will go up on YouTube. We will email you the link in the next few days. You can see it or hear it again if you like, but we would really request you to share it with others. The second thing that we suggest that you might want to do is to take this free holistic health questionnaire that I mentioned earlier. This is a comprehensive way for you to really understand what your own stressors and strengths are. And you can also sign up for a free consultation with one of our cancer coaches after you take the questionnaire and see your report. So all you have to do is to go to this link, hhq.cancerawakens.com, or you can just go to our website and look for HHQ and you can find it and take the questionnaire. That's another step you might want to take. You can also subscribe to our monthly newsletter to stay updated. We have lots of initiatives and events planned. So again, you can go to our website and subscribe to our monthly newsletter if you want. The other thing that you can do if you're really keen on trying out this approach for yourself and really taking charge of your own healing, then you can sign up for our Thriver program. And I'm very happy to announce today that the first 10 people to sign up will get a 10% discount on the cost of the Thriver program. So if you would like to know more, here's an email address of my colleague Anamika Chakravarti. You can email her, or again, you can simply go to our website, click on the Thriver program, and then contact us through the website. We will be happy to support you or your family member or your loved one or a friend in their journey. And the last thing to tell you is that our next webinar, we would request you to spread the word. We are going to have this webinar on the 27th of November, which is a little more than a month from now. It'll be at the same time, 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. IST. And like this month, we talked about breast cancer. Next month, we are going to talk about another very big cancer, which is lung cancer. It's a major type of cancer, particularly in India. So that will be our next webinar. And with that, really, I'd like to draw this session to a close. And the first people I want to thank are our amazing speakers. So Sujata, Anju, Vandana, thank you so much for your time, for all the prep work that you have put in, and for all the valuable tips and inputs that you've given. Next, I'd like to thank all the participants, all of you who made the time and joined this session. Thank you very much for your participation, for your questions. I hope you got some value out of it. And finally, I'd like to thank our technical team led by Rishi, who has been making sure that things ran smoothly. Rishi and team, thank you so much. I want to draw the official part of this question to a close. But if somebody is still posting some questions on the questions group, you may do that. My request is that you can please email me or Anamika directly with your questions, and we will do our best to get some responses back to you in case we have not been able to answer the questions during this webinar. So we will look at the questions and we will cluster them and we will get back to you with some response. So thank you very much. This is Vijay Bhat signing off. All good wishes. Bye for now.